Today's topic is the parable of the persistent widow. It's also known as the parable of the unrighteous judge. The most common interpretation of that is that we need to keep on praying for God to fix our problems, to change our situations, and ultimately, He'll do what we ask. Well, if we ask often enough and long enough and hard enough. The problem with that is, and we both know from experience, He doesn't make everything happen the way we ask. So we end up doubting Him, or our goodness, or our faith, or wonder if prayer even works. There's an old saying about a sportsman who prays for sunny weather and a farmer who prays for rain. Then comes the question, whose prayer does God answer? Is it the one from the guy who's most persistent, or from the person who lives the best life? The answer's neither. God does what's best for everybody. We just don't see things from His perspective. There's a verse in Romans that says, "We know God causes all things to work together for good, to those who love Him, to those who are called according to His purpose." Well, my goal here is to stimulate your thinking by offering a different interpretation of that parable. Hopefully, you'll have something to talk to Him about, something new. And your relationship will become more two-way, like a normal conversation between friends. Now, He was telling them a parable. He, that's Jesus, telling them, that's the disciples, to show that at all times they ought to pray and not to lose heart. There was in a certain city a judge who didn't fear God and he didn't respect man. And there was a widow in that city, and she kept coming to him, saying, "Give me legal protection from my opponent." For a while, he was unwilling, but afterward, he said to himself, "Even though I don't fear God or respect man, yet, because this widow bothers me, I'll give her legal protection, lest by continually coming, she wears me out." And the Lord says, "Hear what the unrighteous judge said." In other words, pay attention. Consider just what that unrighteous judge said. Now, shall not God bring about justice for His elect, who cry to Him day and night? And will He delay long over them? I tell you that He will bring about justice for them speedily. However, when the Son of Man comes, will He find faith on the earth? That common interpretation that I mentioned earlier is that when Jesus parallels the widow with God's elect, He's referring to us Christians. And since the unrighteous judge, who's a worldly person with power and authority over us, since he granted her justice, certainly God will do more for us than that unbelieving man did for her. All we got to do is keep on praying. Well, that might sound right, except it doesn't fit the context. That's not what He was teaching His disciples at the time. Let me explain. Luke's gospel is written in time sequence order. That's what he said in the first 4 verses of his gospel. It's 24 chapters long, and the last half of it are a record of Jesus' last days on earth. And it's in chapter 13 that essentially says, some Pharisees approached Jesus saying, "You need to get out of here. Leave, because Herod wants to kill you." And Jesus responded saying, "You'd be in Jerusalem in 3 days. That's the place where its prophets are murdered, and those who God sent to her are stoned to death," referring to what's going to happen to him. Then, 5 chapters and a few days later, the parable about prayer continues on that very subject. Meanwhile, let me put this situation into familiar perspective. At the time, Israel was subject to Roman rule, enforced by its governors and its brutal armies. To minimize the oversight needed, by that I'm referring to the cost of personnel and supplies, an arrangement had been made for Israel to have a limited self-government. Its leaders could stay in power as long as there was no civil unrest and there was no disobedience to Caesar. When Jesus was talking to the disciples in Luke's account, there was no question as to who the elect were. They knew. They were the children of Abraham, Isaac, and Jacob, Israel. So why did he characterize them as a widow? It's because they were trusting their religious leadership instead of the one who established them as a unique people. The one who had faithfully led and protected them. The one who set them apart to be his witness in the world. She had abandoned him as a husband. Effectively, he was dead to her. And due to her faithless, adulterous heart, he hadn't sent any more prophets. Had been no contact from him for the 400 years leading up to Jesus' birth. The reason Herod wanted to kill Jesus was that those religious leaders had been appealing for his help. They wanted to get rid of a trouble-causing opponent, claiming that peace under the Roman law was at stake. Jesus had supposedly been bringing about civil unrest and was disobedient to Caesar. That's in Luke chapter 23. Now, we know that Pilate was a judge, and he didn't believe in God. He didn't care about the Jewish people. Neither he nor Herod wanted any trouble from their boss, Caesar. Well, leading up to this parable in chapter 17, just a few verses earlier, Jesus talked about his death and his second coming. Now, that's key to understanding the main point of the parable. Let me reread that part. That's the last couple of verses in that chapter 18. Now shall not God bring about justice for his elect, who cry to him day and night? And will he delay long over them? I tell you, he will bring about justice for them, speedily. However, when the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on the earth? Whether we like to think of it as speedily or not, God's justice did come. It was about 40 years after the elect, had begged day and night to have his Son crucified. The Romans destroyed their temple and chased most of the Jewish people out of the country. But it's really Jesus' question about his second coming that's haunting. He said, when the Son of Man comes, will there be faith on the earth? Questioning who will have their faith in God? Well, my opinion of that parable's meaning is that it's not about us. It's not about us diligently praying for God to solve our problems. Not at all. That was telling about his death. What was going to happen right then and there with those disciples. They needed to keep praying so they would have an understanding and they wouldn't lose heart because he was about to leave them. For us, this is about believing that Romans 8 passage, that it's true. You know, the one we know that God causes all things to work together for good to those who love him, to those who are called according to his purpose. It's trusting him to be working out all the stuff that's going on around us and to us, everything crazy that's in the world. It's all for our benefit. But it takes a while to see it. Well, that's enough for today. Until next time, be blessed.